Open to Second Samuel chapter 9. Good to see you. Very grateful for your faith and devotion to the Lord. I am very grateful for the people who assembled this afternoon to put those gift bags together and the Bible package together for the outreach. I think that's a wonderful thing, and I just am so grateful for everybody who's involved in that. I also commend our elders for their good leadership this morning. In the aftermath of that, one of the former elders told me that that's what spiritual leadership is all about, and I agree with him. I thought that was a very good sign. A lot of good things happening here, a lot of good things within this church, and so very blessed to be with you. In 2 Samuel chapter 9, we see that David is king, and he's wanting to bless somebody from Saul's house. And that's how it starts out in verse 1. Why did I put chapter 1? But he was wanting to show kindness to somebody in Saul's house. It's 2 Samuel 9, verse 1 through verse 3. He says, David said, "Is there still anyone who is left of the house of Saul that I might show him kindness for Jonathan's sake?" And there was a servant of the house of Saul whose name was Ziba. So when they had called him to David, the king said, "Are you Ziba?" And he said, "At your service." And the king said, "Is there not still someone of the house of Saul to whom I may show the kindness of God?" And Ziba said to the king, "There is still a son of Jonathan who is lame in his feet." So a nice gesture from David. And when you read that, you might wonder, well, why? Why would he want to do this? Why would he want to carry out this act of kindness for somebody from Saul's family? And it was two parts to this. One is because of Saul's son Jonathan, who was a good friend of David before Jonathan passed. He had promised Jonathan that he would provide for his family and that they would be taken care of. It says in 1 Samuel chapter 20 that that was a promise he made to that man as he was dying. And David, of course, was willing to fulfill that. But he also made the same promise to Saul when Saul was aware of how David spared his life and cutting the robe and not taking the man's life like he could have in the cave. Saul asked him to please show kindness to his family. Well, many years have gone by, and now David, of course, is king, and he's wanting to do this. He's wanting to show kindness with these two men no longer on the earth. And as this text points out, the servant of Saul said there is one last member of that family, and he's lame. And we know his name is Mephibosheth. And it says that in verse 4, the king said to him, "Where is he?" And Ziba said to the king, "Indeed, he is in the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, in Lo-debar." Then the king David sent and brought him out of the house of Machir to the son of Amiel from Lo-debar. That's hard to say. I'm not going to tell you. That's hard. And when Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, had come to David, he fell on his face and prostrated himself. Now you can go back and you can read in the story of Samuel that this man was lame at age 5 because his caretaker had dropped him in chapter 4 and verse 4. But here he is, this descendant. And as he is granted this blessing from David, it says that he approached David with humility, that he fell down before him in verse 6. He fell on his face and prostrated himself. Then David said, "Mephibosheth," he answered, "Here is your servant." So David said to him, "Do not fear, for I will surely show you kindness for Jonathan, your father's sake, and will restore to you all the land of Saul, your grandfather. And you shall eat bread at my table continually." Then he bowed himself and said, "What is your servant that you should look upon such a dead dog as I?" Well, Mephibosheth was certainly a man of humility, a man who appreciated the gesture from the king, and he's lowered himself before David, and he's saying, "Look, I'm unworthy of this. Why would you care for me? a dead dog like me. I'm pitiful. And I think there are two main reasons why he acted that way. One, because he was truly grateful. I mean, he was unable to provide for himself as well as others. And so he couldn't work the field, he couldn't work the land, and so he was a man of great need at this point. And David came to the rescue, and the man appreciated that. But I think there was another reason why Mephibosheth acted the way he did, was because he wanted David to know that as the last heir to Saul's throne, he had no intentions of trying to make a move on the throne and taking it from David. Not like he could, but he just wanted it to be known, I believe, that there was no intention. I'm your servant, you're the king, and I'm bowing down before you. So that seems to be the implication in how this man is responding to David. Well, David says to Ziba, the servant, that this man is to be taken care of. That he was going to make sure that Mephibosheth would be provided for. He said to him in verse 7, "Do not fear, for I will surely show you kindness for Jonathan your father's sake, and will restore you all the land of Saul your grandfather. And you shall eat bread at my table continually." Now, for you and me, that may not be a big deal, for you to eat at my table continually. But for the king to say that, for the king to say that you're always going to have a chair, a spot at my table, that was a high honor. Because not just anybody could go and make their presence known at the king's table, but the king is inviting him. You always have a spot. You're always going to be welcome at the king's table, is the promise to him. And I'm going to restore all the land to you. And he told Ziba that. In verses 9 and 10, the king called Ziba, Saul's servant, said to him, "I have given to your master's son all that belonged to Saul and to all his house. You therefore and your sons and your servants shall work the land for him, and you shall bring in the harvest, that your master's son may have food to eat. But Mephibosheth, your master's son, shall eat bread at my table always." Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. And Ziba said to the king, "According to all that my lord the king has commanded his servants, so will your servants do." So this is by far a very generous move on David's part. That he wasn't just inviting this man to a meal from time to time. I'm going to provide continual income for you. I'm going to give you back all your grandfather's land. We're going to make the servants work the land so that you can have a steady income. You'll always have enough provided for you. And then whenever you want or whenever it's possible, you can eat at my table always. I mean, that's tremendous. That is a very generous move on David's part, but he wanted this man to know, you're okay. Don't worry, the bills are paid. I'm taking care of you from here on out. And that had to mean something to Mephibosheth in all the aftermath of all that he lost within his family. With it being part of the royal family, that being stripped away from him, his father, grandfather dying. So this was definitely a very generous move from David. And it wasn't like he just simply said, "Okay, you can come and sit at the table." He told Mephibosheth, "You're going to be like family to us. You're going to be part of my family. You will always have a spot." It says later in the text that Mephibosheth received this honor in verse 11. It says, "As for Mephibosheth, said the king, he shall eat at my table like one of the king's sons." Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Micah. And all who dwell in the house of Ziba were servants of Mephibosheth. So Mephibosheth dwelt in Jerusalem, for he ate continually at the king's table, and he was lame in both his feet. So David is going above and beyond, but it's like, okay, my home is your home. My family is your family. You're one of us now. And I want you to feel welcomed. And I want you to, you're not intruding. Mephibosheth, we want you here. It was that type of move. And you're provided for, and you have nothing to be concerned about. Now, there's a reason why God included this story in the Bible. I mean, all the many wonderful things that David did. Well, surely there's a reason why God would spend the time to record this story for us. And I would think that there are some tremendous lessons we can learn from this. One, and this should be an apparent one, is that the grandfather's sins are not necessarily the sins of the children or grandchildren. Now, we know that Saul was the archenemy of David. We know he tried to kill David on multiple occasions. I mean, the man was definitely evil in heart toward David. But what we see is that man's sins did not necessarily mean they trickled down to Mephibosheth. And David knew that. That he was not going to treat Mephibosheth from a certain perspective in partiality because of the way the grandfather treated him. And of course, to keep his word to Jonathan. This just goes to show, though, everybody should be allowed to prove themselves, right? Everybody should be allowed to prove themselves based on their character and who they are, not necessarily because of the parents or grandparents. That's a lesson we see over and over in the Kings. I remember I was at a service one time, visiting, and the song leader was probably in his 20s, had a young family, and he was very impressive. He did a great job leading singing, and he had a certain amount of humility to him, just a real kind soul, genuine. He came across as a very genuine Christian. Well, the reason that stood out to me, and I didn't let him know this, and I doubt I ever will, is because I knew the background of that boy's family. That boy was the product of his father, who was a Christian that we worshiped, who was unfaithful. And he was unfaithful to his wife, and he got this other woman pregnant, and that was that boy's mother. And the terrible thing about it all is that they tried to justify it when it happened. The father and the family tried to justify this relationship. And it was a sinful relationship. There was a sinful marriage, no doubt about it. But that did not define that boy. And it did not determine his character, his faith for his life. And certainly he had risen above that. Even if he did know about it, he had risen above it. But it just reminded me that everybody has a chance to prove themselves. That you're not going to be judged by God based on what your parents did or your grandparents did. Morally, that is. Everybody has a chance to prove themselves. And I see that happening with David and Mephibosheth. The archenemy Saul, his grandson, is at the king's table because David showed him kindness. I see another good lesson, and that is we need to be people who keep our word. The only reason he's going above and beyond is because he had made a promise many years ago to Jonathan as he was dying, and then King Saul as he was coming to an end. I'll take care of your family. Now, those men, Jonathan and Saul, were no longer on this earth. And yet David was still keeping a promise to dead people who would not even know about it. But that was his character. That was his integrity. That he was going to keep his word because he said it. And because he promised it to these men. In James chapter 5, the Bible teaches that our word should be bond. That it should be gold and solid. In James chapter 5, that if we promise something, if we can perform it and be consistent with God's will, then we need to keep our word. It says in James chapter 5 and verse 12, "But above all, brethren, do not swear either by heaven or by earth or with any other oath, but let your yes be yes and your no, no, lest you fall into judgment." In other words, he's teaching us that if we say it's yes, then let it be yes. That there's no deception, no deceit. We keep our word. And again, David is doing this out of integrity. Jonathan and Saul didn't even know about it. He was doing it out of integrity. When Stephanie's father passed away many years ago, the man was generous to a core. He loaned out so much to people. Very generous man. And there were people that he had loaned money to who said they were going to pay him back, and they never did. And they never paid it back to the family, even to this day. They didn't keep their word. They didn't keep their word to a dead man. David kept his word. And if it's possible for us to fulfill our promise without violating God's will, I believe it's in our best interest to be people of integrity and let our yes be yes and our no, no. And God says David is a man who walks like me, after my own heart. And I would think it's his integrity that is part of that. Well, I see another good lesson, and that is we need to be people who love generously from the heart. Again, David didn't just simply say, okay, well, slide an extra chair at the table for this guy. I got to keep my word to his father. He loved in such a way to where Mephibosheth felt it, right? He loved in such a way that Mephibosheth felt welcomed and honored and cared for. That's the love of God. And really, that's what he was saying. Who can I show the generosity of God to in this family? In Luke chapter 6, the Bible teaches that God is a very generous God. And he says, I want my people to be generous. I really need to read verse 32 through verse 36, if you would. Jesus says, if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. And if you lend to those from whom you hope to receive back, what credit is that to you? For even sinners lend to sinners to receive as much back. But love your enemies, do good, and lend, hoping for nothing in return. And your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High, for He is kind to the unthankful and evil. Therefore be merciful, just as your Father also is merciful. Now, how hard is that to do? You know, when somebody is doing evil to you, or is doing evil that hurts you, or hurts your loved ones, or hurts your brethren, how easy is it to do good and to be generous and kind and merciful? Well, God says, look, anybody can love those who love them. I want you to be like me. I want you to love people who don't like you. I want you to love people who don't care for you, who do want to hurt you, who are your enemy. I want you to love without expecting anything in return. That's the kind of love. And that's a beautiful love. And I understand that the women were taught that recently in their class. To be willing to give and to bless and to be allowed to bless those with a need. That's a generous thing. Can we send a card without a return address on it or even our name on it? Can we bless somebody in some way without expecting anything in return? And I am no doubt that's how David saw this. He wasn't like, okay, Mephibosheth, I'm going to set you up a tab. Okay? So many dinners, and then you got to pay me back. He didn't do that. He just simply opened his heart and his home to this man. That's the love of God, and that's what Jesus calls us to. Let me say one last thing, and it's a good point. And that is, we need to be people who see God's love for us. Now, you might say, well, how in the world does God's love for us tie into this story of David and this man? Well, I think there's a wonderful parallel here. I mean, are we not like Mephibosheth? Are we not lame, unable to provide for ourselves? Have we not hurt ourselves or been hurt spiritually to where we cannot excel on our own? Surely we can say that. And that we are dependent on God being merciful to us and helping us with what we're going through. No doubt, we would all agree with that. But have we not been received like one of the king's sons. You have not just been extended mercy by God. He has opened His home, His family. You are a child of God. It's not like you're on just good terms with God. You're a friend of God, which is great, a comrade. You're a son of God, a daughter of God. You are in the family of God. And that is a tremendous honor that even Paul recognized in telling the Galatians their need to remain faithful to the Lord and faithful to Christianity in not departing from it for the Jewish traditions. He says that this is where you entered the family of God. Galatians chapter 4, it says in verse 4 beginning, "But when the fullness of the time had come, God sent forth His Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, that we might receive the adoption as sons. And because you are sons, God has sent forth the Spirit of His Son into your hearts, crying, Abba, Father. Therefore, you are no longer a slave, but a son. And if a son, then an heir of God through Christ." I would like to think that that means something to us. That we are in the family of God. We are God's family, His children, His household. And the only reason it's been made possible is because of His generosity and His pity and His keeping His word, keeping His promise, and showing kindness to people who don't deserve it. That should mean something to us. And that should cause us to have greater faith and appreciation for Him. And I just see that parallel. We're at the King's table. It's not like He put us in a back room. He put us at His table as one of the family members. And we need to be grateful for that every day of our life. And so I share these thoughts. I told someone that I think it's going to be a short one, and hopefully I kept my word. You got to yes, yes, no, no, right? You got to keep your word. But it was a good lesson to be reminded of these great principles in love and generosity. I hope it helped you. If you're here and you're not a child of God, we sing a song to persuade you to put your faith in the Lord and to obey the gospel the way it's outlined in the Bible. And if you don't understand that, we ask you for an opportunity. But it could be you just need the prayers of the saints here. Like was stated, there's a lot happening here. There's a lot. We're under attack, no doubt, by the devil. And we need one another. But if you are subject to the Lord's invitation in any way, please respond as we stand and sing.